right now we have number go up, freedom go up, censorship resistance, permissionlessness, and wealth all in one package. And that's what's made this freedom technology scale. And we want to keep it that way. We want to keep these things together as long as possible. That's been Bitcoin's success.
All right, welcome everybody. Today we are here with the one and only Troy Cross, professor of philosophy and humanities at Reed College and senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Also author of an absolutely fantastic article in the latest edition, and I'm going to do some shilling here, of Bitcoin Magazine. This is what this beautiful piece looks like. He contributed a piece on mining and how important it is to decentralize the hash rate. We'll dive into that in just a moment, though. Troy, let me just hand the mic over to you. Anything further, a little introduction for yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Frank. I'm a longtime Bitcoiner, and I've thought about mining issues for a long time. And this piece is really uh, me thinking at a high sort of philosophical level about the future of Bitcoin mining and hash rate and where it goes.
Yeah, which I think is quite important. We're both coming to you, audience, live from the United States. We know we have quite a pro Bitcoin administration here under the Trump administration. Donald Trump has said he would like everything, the Bitcoin made in the USA. Maybe he hadn't read, well, maybe he's not sort of familiar with what why there's a benefit to distributing the Bitcoin hash rate. But before we dive into that, let's actually just start with the article. So the name of the piece is called "The Future of Bitcoin Mining is Distributed." Could you provide us with a bit of a high-level overview of what the piece entails?
Sure. Well, what we've seen in the history of Bitcoin is that it's become more concentrated in large data centers. I mined myself in 2011, first on some laptops around the house and then with some graphics cards. And everybody has a CPU. Satoshi noted that. Um, Everybody will be running the software, and the original software had a button that allowed you to mine. The Bitcoin QT software, my original foray into mining was just clicking on that one button on this software that Core developed. So
And when was this, if you don't mind, just for the sake of for
yeah,
context here?
that was 2011. But I say in the piece when the button was finally taken off the software, and it was quite a bit later. It was like 2014 or
Mm,
2015, something like that. But by then nobody was using Core to software Bitcoin QT to mine anyway.
right.
But in the white paper, every node was a miner and every miner was a node. Satoshi didn't really think of running a node and mining as two separate uh, kind of things, but
Right.
mining became separate, and that's because of specialized equipment used to mine, the chips that were later developed just for mining. And even when I was mining with graphics cards, mining was kind of an ordeal. Just like setting up and optimizing my miner was not a trivial thing for someone who didn't have technical skills. So
Right.
already there was a kind of like specialization that went into mining. And whenever you get specialization and specialized equipment, you get economies of scale.
Right.
And in the piece, I go into why there are economies of scale. And I actually went back and read the beginning of Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith to brush up on like what he says about economies of scale. And it's really just like across all industries. Uh, once you have specialized knowledge and specialized equipment, the per unit cost of producing anything uh, usually goes down when you make a lot of them. Uh, his example is a pin factory
Right.
where you have something like uh, uh, 10 employees in a pin factory and some specialized equipment, and you can make um, 10,000 pins a day. But if each one of those workers were to make a pin on their own, they could maybe make one per day. So number of pins you can make per person increases with scale dramatically. And that's why not everybody is making their own pins, but you have them made in large factories. And economies of scale work across many dimensions, like financing is a big one.
Yep.
Uh, you know, uh, it, it, by for miners, buying power, uh, getting purchasing uh, agreements with ASIC manufacturers. There are many advantages to being a large miner, just like any other industry. And the piece kind of goes through some of those advantages, like uh, maintenance. Uh, if you have one miner in your basement, if it breaks down, you need to like ship it out to get it fixed or learn to fix it yourself. Whereas if you're Riot, you just have the people who maintain ASICs, somebody recognizes that it's down, as alerted to that, and then they just roll a ladder along a shelf and
Right.
go to that machine, pull it off, and the expert takes care of it, right? um, and yeah, so there's a lot of fixed cost to running a mining operation, that adding an additional ASIC to your fleet does not cost you that much.
Right.
When you have a large operation, it's just the cost of the ASIC. The fixed costs are all the same. And what we've seen in mining is large operations uh, become even larger, and gain more advantages because of those economies of scale. Uh, and so that and many of the things that keep other industries from scaling in the way that mining has scaled don't apply to mining. For instance, the good Bitcoin, which is produced by mining, is fungible. Uh, so it's not like you have your specialty, handmade artisanal Portland Bitcoin, and you can charge extra for them the way you can for a handmade Portland goods. Generally, it's not
Yeah.
like a restaurant where uh, every dish is special and every place is special. The food at the Bitcoin restaurant is all identical,
Hmm.
and it doesn't spoil, and it can be shipped anywhere in the world instantly. That's another big reason things don't scale, is just the cost of shipping the product. If you make a product locally, you don't have to ship it as far.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't have just like one food factory and everybody just eats food from that factory. Because even food production has economies of scale. So anyway, Bitcoin mining has special reasons that it should be more efficient at scale, because the good is fungible, because it is free to ship. You would predict that it would scale. Uh, and if it's scaled, ultimately it should just be in like one place. Like you should have one giant Bitcoin factory,
Right.
and like
Make it.
Donald Trump said, just like in the USA, and we
Boom.
make all the Bitcoin here. And then the piece explores uh, the flip side, the diseconomies of scale for Bitcoin in particular.
I want to get back into that. And I also want to go a little deeper into economies of scale, but I want to start even higher level than
Oh,
something you
okay.
touched in. That's all right. No, even higher level than something you touched in the piece. And then I want to go to the dangers of the Bitcoin being made in the United States as a context for people
Ah,
here. But to start, you brought up this when you were just discussing the old nodes where you could just press a mining button if you wanted to do it. So a lot of people, I think some people are under the impression that maybe Satoshi had like the whole master plan of Bitcoin mapped out and how it would all unfold, when that's really not the case. Just on a really, really high level, some people say that Satoshi never really envisioned mining pools in general. Is that your belief? Do you think that mining pools in general would be a surprise to Satoshi if he were still with us today, or if he may still would be with us, but he doesn't comment on what happens for sure?
yeah, I don't know. I don't see an indication of it. I don't think. I mean, Satoshi had an amazing foresight in some ways.
Yep.
I think the arbitrary choices that were made, uh, in the 4-year halving cycle, amazing.
Yeah.
Makes you think that he was some kind of prophet, because if that 4-year cycle has to match in some ways the price growth of Bitcoin in order for it to work. It's
Yes.
like a glide path coming into the re-entry path for the atmosphere. If the halving is too fast, you get a disaster. If it's too slow, you get a disaster, right? So there are choices that, I mean, nothing would surprise me basically
Okay.
after thinking about that. But no, uh, I don't see any evidence in what I've read from Satoshi,
Hmm.
that for pools. I don't think Satoshi saw the the whole industrial machinery of mining, I think that's contrary to Satoshi's uh,
Original vision.
original vision. Yeah, I
Mm,
hesitate to use the word Satoshi's vision now, but
yeah,
um, but I do. I think the whole point was that that hash rate needs to be distributed. He does say that he sees it happening more in cold climates.
interesting.
So that indicates that it's not just going to be everywhere and uniform, because he says, people are going to pay for heat anyway.
Yep,
And so he thinks that hash rate will migrate to those cold climates. So
yep,
that says he doesn't think it's just like every node is going to be a miner forever. Uh, but no, he's not omniscient. People forget that, like, most of the code is not Satoshi's at this point, even.
right,
Um,
right.
yeah, it's a collective project, and it's an evolving project, and that's kind of what's exciting about it. Part of what prompted this piece is like trying to peer out into the future of Bitcoin using kind of the first Bitcoin mining, using the first principles,
Yep.
because it's very hard to see what already happened is hard to see.
Agreed. Yeah. So what has happened, just to provide a little bit of an overview for the audience here, is
Yeah.
that we do have a pretty sizable amount of the hash rate in the United States. Large pubcos, Marathon, Riot, Clean Spark, number of other pubcos, and just other bigger miners, some that are private, have a lot of the hash rate. Why? So, and this is probably something Satoshi didn't envision. Why is this dangerous to Bitcoin in
Mm.
general?
Yeah, I don't actually know how much of the hash rate we have here in the US. Uh, some things that I can't talk about, but I've heard about, make me think it's even higher than
Mm,
what's public, and it's probably well north of 50%. Actually, is my
mm,
latest guess.
mm.
Well north of 50%. Uh, why is that bad? Well, I outline in the piece how a government might attack Bitcoin. Basically, um, we know that Treasury could just issue a directive to all miners saying, uh, don't don't include payments from the following addresses, and then list like a bunch of addresses that include whatever enemies of the state, like North Korea, whatever. If they want to spend their Bitcoin, you as a miner should not include any transactions from the known addresses of Lazarus Group or whatever
Right.
in a block. Uh, that's not disastrous for Bitcoin at all, because some other miner, not in the United States or not listening to Treasury, will include those transactions in a block, and they'll still get through, and Bitcoin will still be censorship resistant. Uh, and even more so, this is long been the game theory of Bitcoin mining. Uh, those transactions those addresses that are blacklisted will their fees will go to the non cooperating miners,
Yep.
and they may even include more fees to get in. And so since we have a global network, and Treasury Department doesn't control the global network, some miner will include it in a block. But this is not comforting. This does not comfort me, because there's another kind of directive that a government could give to miners in their jurisdiction, which is uh, don't in, don't include any of the transactions from blacklisted addresses, but also don't um, mine a block on top of any block that contains payments from a blacklisted address.
Yep.
And that sort of directive, if you were to try to follow it, you would have to orphan blocks that include the forbidden transactions. You would be forced to orphan those blocks. If if enough people, if enough hash rate is orphaning those blocks, then those um, miners who do include them are never in fact they never in fact receive their Bitcoin after the built-in delay for miners to get their reward. The block that included that forbidden transaction is no longer part of the chain that has the most work, the heaviest chain.
Yep.
And so then there's just like no incentive to, if you have 51% of the hash rate, that is obeying this directive. That's a big if. But if you
Yep.
had that situation, then any other miner in the world that includes one of those transactions, their block will be orphaned. Uh, they won't get the block subsidy, and they won't get those fees. So they will have to follow the directive as well if they want to be part of the heaviest chain.
Right.
Um, they could, of course, fork away from the OFAC compliant uh, chain, but that fork would involve changing something about Bitcoin. We could either, I don't know, abandon proof of work,
Yep.
and right now, your node, when it selects uh, which the authentic Bitcoin blockchain, when it asks that question of the many candidates out there, it just asks which chain has the most work and starts with the Genesis block, and whichever one has the most work is the authentic chain.
Yep.
Uh, uh, it, if 51% of the hash rate were to obey that kind of directive, that would be Bitcoin according to your node right now. So you'd have to do something like invalidate blocks manually that come from the wrong miners, uh, or adopt a different hashing algorithm, or move to some other thing, which I hesitate to even say in this venue, but like proof of stake.
Right.
You would need to do something to fork away, and and then uh, and then economically, you would have two competing Bitcoin forks, and the one is going to be OFAC compliant, and all of the institutional money that's flowing into Bitcoin now, the BlackRock ETF, they're going to
Right.
go with that one. Come on.
Yep.
Anyone in this jurisdiction is going to go with that one. That's operating legally. I mean, MicroStrategy is going to go with that one. The U.S. government and their sovereign, uh, in their
Fund their
reserves,
reserves. Right.
the strategic Bitcoin reserve, they're going to go with that one, and they're going to dump the fork. And then eventually the world will find the need for freedom money again. And I think eventually, long term, the Bitcoin successor is fine, but it's disastrous in the short term. It
Yeah.
requires a fork of some kind. It requires moving away from proof of work proper, linked to the original Genesis block and the original hashing algorithm, and it requires some form of social consensus about what to do. If you're going to invalidate blocks, you have to figure out which blocks to invalidate. You need an authority to tell you that, or some kind of
Yep.
uh, what's beautiful about Bitcoin is that it's just the heaviest chain, and
Yep.
there's no social deference required. And I think people underestimate how cool and unique and awesome that is. There's nothing else like that. It's just, it's a we look at basically sets of numbers, and we decide what the authentic blockchain is. And this kind of intervention uh, would require us to do something more like Ethereum does, where you have some some soft social consensus
Yeah.
underlying
Right.
what we do. And if it's proof of work, we could stick with proof of work, but we would still need to shift to a new thing, a new thing, and we have to decide, you know, what to shift to and how, and that would be fraught. So this is just not a. This may be the future, but it's not a future we want to deal with. Right now, we have number go up, freedom go up, censorship resistance, permissionlessness, and wealth all in one package. And
Yep.
that's what's made this freedom technology scale.
Yep.
And we want to keep it that way.
Yes.
Uh, we want to keep these things together as long as possible. That's been Bitcoin's success. And
Yep.
so concentration of hash rate introduces this vector of attack from a government that could tear those apart and force us to restart this project in some ways.
Yep.
Uh, and it's a somewhat far-fetched scenario, given maybe the current regime. They don't seem inclined to do this, but it wasn't far-fetched in the Biden administration, and it's one election
Removed.
removed.
Yeah.
Exactly. Carol House, who held a number of positions in the White House, uh, explicitly would not rule out the scenario that I just described. Um, Treasury forbidding miners to include transactions that from forbidden addresses, but also forbid miners from mining on top uh, of blocks that were non-compliant.
Yep.
And when I asked her explicitly, like, don't you realize this is basically saying mining Bitcoin is illegal? Because those blocks are going to get included. I mean, she was like, we're aware of what it is and we're not taking it off the table. We want you guys to fix it yourselves. So that's the,
Mm,
and I'm like, what do you mean fix it ourselves? Like the whole point of Bitcoin is nobody can fix it.
right.
But the previous administration was not only aware of this possibility and understood what it meant, but they also refused to take it off the table.
Yep.
So it's not, it's far fetched under this administration, but it's not super far fetched.
Okay. I say this, I guess, jokingly at the risk of losing my job. Does the Trump administration only care about the number go up dimension of Bitcoin? Does the Trump administration also maybe not care about the censorship resistance qualities? And some of it is just, I guess, maybe self preservation. I speak with a lot of politicians, and whenever I bring up stuff like even crypto mixers, Tornado Cash, Samurai Wallet, they sort of get a little jittery when I talk about, freedom to transact, censorship resistance. Do politicians really like this? Or, I think, you know, or is it just sort of the number go up technology? Bitcoin is the hot issue right now. Does this thought go through your head at all? What do you think?
I think it's the, I don't know. I have a hard time not seeing this in very moralistic terms
Okay.
myself. Um, I think we might be facing a serious choice. Like uh, we as Bitcoiners,
Yeah.
um, because we are there are two paths in front of us. One where we really fight for the freedom profile of Bitcoin, its freedom essence, and one where we just cheer on number go up. And in the end, I don't think that the number can go up unless it retains its freedom characteristics.
Yep.
And my hope is that Wall Street and Washington will ultimately see what I see. That if you capture this technology and start censoring it, then it has no appeal as neutral a neutral monetary device.
Good.
Um,
Right.
and so you've killed the goose that's laying the golden eggs, basically. Uh, I don't see an indication that the Trump administration realizes that yet. They are learning. Um, they are learning. I was encouraged by the initial announcement of strategic crypt or the strategic crypto reserve or
Yep.
whatever, crypto stockpile, which then morphed, which was terrible and included, Solana and
ADA.
ADA and
Yeah.
XRP, like, and then the transformation of that into the executive order, which I thought was very good.
Yes. Agreed.
Um, that transformation, that executive order was excellent. Was quick and it tells me that the Trump administration is listening to the right people,
Yep.
and they're willing to learn. So I don't know. I have hope on this front that they'll come to see that those freedom characteristics are essential for it to
Yep.
play its role. But I don't see any evidence that they have yet learned that lesson.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I'm not as tied in with as David Bailey or someone like that, right? So
Understood. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the big question. It's how much do they want it to retain those characteristics so that it retains its value, especially if they're going to create the strategic Bitcoin reserve and have it be the strategic asset for the United States. And that could vary. Honestly, it's interesting when I speak with certain politicians, especially the ones that are sort of OG Bitcoiners. Just spoke with Nick Begich recently, and
he
he
gets
talked
it.
about, yeah, he gets it and he thinks it's important. And he even said things along the lines of like, well, if the fiat system fails, then we're going to need something to fall back on. So you sort of have to hope, I guess, that some of these voices remain prominent within the administration. I mean, he's the one who introduced the Bitcoin Act to the House, which was we reintroduced it. It's the same or similar bill that Lummis introduced to the Senate. So yeah, it's. I think honestly, I don't think there's a hard answer here. I think you're right.
No.
You just sort of have to hope the right people are sort of spreading the right message and have the right. Right is a tough word to use here, but that
Yeah.
the incentives
I,
play out the way we think
y-
they might.
Yeah, and we have a responsibility here. Um, we can choose our, like, we have a moment here. We have a friendly administration. We
Yep.
have a uh, uh, yeah, we have an incredible sea change in the attitudes towards Bitcoin and crypto on the in Washington, and we can choose what we prioritize. And
Yep.
so, to some extent, this is on up to us. Like, how much do we care about it? How
Yep.
much do Bitcoiners care about those aspects?
Yep.
The politicians reflect us ultimately.
Ideally, in a representative democracy,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Anyway, that's the threat. I think it's real. I think it's not ultimate. It's not existential for Bitcoin, but
Yep.
it's real. And I should say too, some of this terrific magazine outlined some of the other threats that I chose not to talk about. That also involve mining centralization,
Yep.
but at the level of pools and block template construction and stuff. There
Yep.
are more ways than just this one.
Yeah,
But
just yeah. For anyone who thought that was it, that's the only thing we need to overcome. There are many hurdles with
there are many
physical.
other hurdles.
Correct. Yeah. 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 Well, we can get into that at a later date. One big thing that does make the U.S. an attractive place for mining, and you outline this in your article, is the rule of law. And I've had this conversation with Thomas Pacquiao a lot, who's sits on the board of Stronghold, a mining company in the United States. Thomas is the owner, also one of the owners of PubKey. He says, sure, you can go mine Bitcoin in Kazakhstan or in some part of Siberia or in Paraguay or something like that. But there, you don't have, you're taking the risk of sending these miners into a jurisdiction where you don't know if they'll be stolen from you. I recently spoke with the gentleman Seb Gospelou behind Big Block Data Center. He's like the Indiana Jones of mining. He's been to some remote regions where he's had
Mhm.
mafias shake him down for his mining equipment, for Bitcoin, for mining in certain locales. So rule of law is a really powerful thing in the United States, and it's a reason why I think a lot of miners want to stay here. Um, do you think it even maybe if the cheapest energy is not here, that it's just a very attractive place for the mining to come to, and it's sort of inevitable that more than 50% of the hash rate comes to the United States?
No, I think
Okay.
rule of law is overrated.
Whoa. Okay.
Uh-huh. There's a hot take.
Yeah.
Where
Go.
not from the perspective of a company. From a perspective of a company, of course, it's not overrated. You need the
Yeah.
rule of law. Although, look at what's just happened. Trump just announced tariffs on the countries where ASICs are coming from,
Yes.
and there's your rule of law. You just got slapped with an unbelievable tariff, and if you were taking a hit on other dimensions in order to get a friendly political environment, it just blew back in your face.
Yeah.
But no, I think ultimately, and I'm sorry how I launched this thing, but I launched this thing talking about the economies of scale.
Yep.
And in a way, why isn't Bitcoin mining all in one place already? Because
Yep.
it doesn't have a problem transporting its good, and its goods are all fungible. So why don't we just have one giant Bitcoin factory to maximize economies of scale? And the chief reason I think that we don't is the distribution of energy, cheap
Right.
energy around the world, and the difficulty of shipping energy. So it's still a transportation problem for scaling, but not on the output side, but on the input side. The
Yep.
input to Bitcoin mining is energy. And I guess there's another transportation issue, which is the ASICs, because it turns out that shipping them here from China is also going to be expensive.
Yep.
Uh, but in terms of rule of law, yes, if you're a company, you need that stability and predictability. You don't want your miners to just be seized. We know that miners have been seized, like in
Yep.
Venezuela, for instance. Government just comes in, takes miners. I mean, why not? It's like taking money bags, money printers. Um, but I think that if you have a situation where you've got cheap pockets of energy around the world, and then you have more expensive energy, but with rule of law, and you're asking yourself, where is hash rate going to go? I'm going to go with the cheap energy
Okay.
because because if I mean if the if the law themselves, the government themselves decides to mine there, uh, they can outcompete the people who are mining on more expensive energy under rule
Fair.
of law
Yeah. Yeah.
because they have cheaper inputs. So I think it's like, first of all, some of those countries without rule of law, they are very bribable. And if you look at the cost of doing business there, yeah, it's not predictable. They don't have rule of law, but they have rule of people, and they still respect a bribe.
That's right.
And so, you look at the bribe cost; it's not that much. But then also, I think sovereigns are going to figure it out, and if they just can't attract miners, they will mine themselves, and they will hire experts to make their operations more efficient. Uh, it's kind of like saying all the oil will be produced in the United States because the United States has rule of law. It's like, well, where are the oil deposits?
Yeah,
They're
that's a
all
great
over the
point.
world. And
Yep.
I think we have inefficiencies in extracting oil in, say, Venezuela, uh, because state run oil operations aren't so good.
Yep. They
They're
don't.
not.
They're basically non-existent at this point. Most of them have been run into the ground. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Maybe it's a
Yep.
bad example for me,
No, no,
but
no. But you're right. The point is
but
correct. I get what you're saying.
I
Yep.
feel like I still feel like if there's tons of oil reserves in Nigeria and you're going to get that oil out of the ground in Nigeria somehow. They're
Yes.
not going to just leave it in there, and that's what cheap energy is. It's a reserve of Bitcoin in disguise. It just
Totally.
needs to get out, and they'll pay to get the expertise in there to 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 transform that energy uh into sats. And you look at these like large projects like the Itapu Dam in Peru, or the large dam in hydroelectric
If
project in Kenya. Overbuilt energy systems, they are drawing miners in there because otherwise they're just bleeding money. uh
Yep.
and this is a way for them to get return. So I think it's temporary. It makes perfect sense. This is what happened in mining. Okay,
Yep.
China banned Bitcoin mining. They had the majority of hash rate. Suddenly became hugely profitable to mine Bitcoin. Also, this was during a bull run, during an epic bull run,
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
a few $1,000s up to 60 something $1,000.
Yep.
So, epic bull run, and COVID had hit. So the supply chains were impacted. So you
Yep.
couldn't buy ASICs um, as fast as you wanted them. You had incredibly profitable opportunities for mining, basically on any price power anywhere in the world, and all these ASICs were looking for some place to go. They Where did they go? Well, in the U.S. capital markets, you couldn't buy Bitcoin directly, but you could buy Bitcoin miners as
Yep.
stocks.
Yep.
So the miners provided this surrogate way to invest in Bitcoin. So the miners are flush with cash. They're getting these speculative dollars thrown at them. And they're in America. We have the deepest capital markets. It's American money. Those miners then move into uh, pockets of the industrial US that were hollowed out by the exportation of manufacturing, where we still
Factory
had
jobs. Right.
electrical infrastructure. So they moved into, upstate New York, Pennsylvania, Appalachia, uh, yeah, Georgia, Texas, yeah, places with cheap power, Oregon, Washington. You had miners moving into these places, uh, and and yes, there's rule of law there. So under those circumstances, where do you go? The U.S. for sure, because that's where
Right.
your company is. That's where the law is. That's where available energy infrastructure is. Uh, Everything said the U.S. So hash rate moved, yes, to Kazakhstan, but also to the U.S. And then
Right.
Kazakhstan turned out to be kind of fluky because they subsidized coal, and the miners came in and ate those subsidies up, and then there was a reaction within Kazakhstan's government to that, and they made the conditions much harsher and booted a lot of the mining out.
Yep.
U.S. was much more stable, although something similar happened, in New York State. Uh, so
Don't get me started as a New Yorker living under
yeah,
this governor. I can't. That we have a 2-year moratorium on Bitcoin mining that isn't
yes,
100% renewable. For those who are wondering what Troy is referencing, yeah, it's
yes, that's
heartbreaking to me. Yeah.
so so everything that happened made perfect sense, and the rule of law made perfect sense. Now look to the future. We're in a completely different environment. Have you
Mm.
seen the hash rate? It won't stop. What are we at? 800
Yeah.
something
All time high.
exahash, all-time high just set yesterday. um so look at hash price. It's Even though Bitcoin's price has done really well over the past year, the hash price just keeps dropping, and I predict
Yeah.
it will continue to drop. So
Yep.
in that environment, do you care about rule of law? You can barely break even. Mining is not a profitable business on anything but the cheapest power in the world,
Yep.
and that power is distributed because of natural features of the world,
Yep.
because the sun is distributed around the
Right.
planet,
Yep.
because real estate is distributed, because uh,
Rivers are distributed.
rivers
Yeah.
are distributed, or yeah, fossil deposits are distributed.
Yep.
Basically, the thesis of my piece is that in a low margin environment, which is the destiny of Bitcoin,
Yep.
uh, power, which is 80% of your operating costs, um, the price of power will dictate where the hashing is done.
Yep.
And that is global. That is all over the world. And other things that push Bitcoin to be distributed, like the reuse of waste heat from miners. The need for heat does not scale. Even even a village doesn't need a massive amount of mining
Yep.
to heat itself. So certainly most heating projects are very, very small in terms of hash rate. So the need for heat and the availability of energy, cheap energy, will dictate the location of hash rate. This is from a very high level, from a philosopher, but
Yeah.
I can't see what's going to stop hash rate from finding that cheapest power in and ultimately distributing the hash rate globally.
Yep. Another question there. So, one of the best examples of what you're talking about, I would say, is Gridless. And for those who are unfamiliar, Gridless does incredible work. I'm going to forget now. I think it's Zambia, Kenya, and Botswana, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that's the third country, but my apologies. They operate in three different African countries. They're utilizing hydroelectric power in some of the most rural regions of Africa. I think the company itself is now going to start getting into actually creating their own energy facilities. So right now they're the buyer of last resort, which means they're buying the excess power that's being created on the grids in rural Africa, way out in Africa, clean energy. And what's interesting there, so there's two reasons I bring this up, and I'll start with the first reason is that one, rule of law might not be as strong in these places, but once the villages understand the value of Bitcoin, the elders in the village now say, no, 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 we will protect these Bitcoin mining facilities. And I think that goes to your point about bribes, or like people have their own sort of agreements. So do you see more of that forming, people just saying, no, no, this Bitcoin thing has value and we're going to protect it in this region because we know it has value, that superseding the rule of law?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, these are smallish projects. Um, I think, yes, locally you defend those projects because they add real value to your communities. I would love to see the gridless model scale. It's just tremendous what they're doing. Uh, we 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 are going to have a lot of wasted power in this world, enough to power the Bitcoin mining network many times over.
Yep.
um, and that makes everybody's power more expensive. When Bitcoin moves in, it makes power cheaper for other
Right.
users. It's always the buyer of last resort. In this low margin environment, it's never going to crowd out a retail buyer.
Right.
It's never going to it's never going to crowd out basically any other use. Bitcoin is going to use the cheapest, 1% of energy in the world.
Right.
So that's monetizing energy that otherwise would be wasted, and that's a net benefit to the system. So who wouldn't want that? Uh, I think we were thinking about it now is too much like the enemies of Bitcoin think about it.
Hmm.
We're too on the defensive about Bitcoin mining, because we think of it as just a model of, like, a large data center comes into a community, fires up these really noisy machines, eats up all the power. That's how like the mayor of Plattsburgh, New York, who's an
Yep.
economist and who's written a
Yep.
book about how Bitcoin mining destroyed his town. Like, that's his model. We come into your town, uh, we use up your cheap power, and put everybody out of business and make a lot of noise and don't really contribute anything to your community. That's not the truth of Bitcoin mining.
Right.
That's isolated incidents of it, and that's not its future. Its future is, I call it the dung beetle. It's literally consuming the waste of the energy system,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that waste, and monetizing that waste, and that's a net benefit. And when people see that benefit, it's like, yeah, you still don't want your machine stolen, but the law will work on your behalf, we're going to have, we're going to have utilities advocating for Bitcoin mining. We're going to
Right.
have governments advocating for it. We're going to have various little interest groups like whatever. Greenpeace will still be out there saying, Bitcoin mining is destroying things, it's harming the planet. And we're going to have the executives from utilities come in and say, actually, we really need a flexible, portable,
Yep.
scalable, location agnostic, time agnostic consumer of power. We now have that, and please do not take it away from us because we'll have to raise your bills and find some other way to balance the grid.
Yep.
And we're moving into that phase.
There's something I'd like to clarify for the listeners because I didn't always grasp this point that you're making. It was actually Janet, one of
Yeah.
the founders of Gridlet, that really drove this home for me. So, for those who might not be getting why Bitcoin mining cheapens the cost of electricity, is so when they're using the electricity at times when otherwise people wouldn't be using it. So, for example, with Gridless, they shut off in the morning when people are getting ready for work. They shut off at night while people are using electricity, watching television, whatever they're doing. Um, so you have a buyer, what we call a buyer of last resort, and they're buying the energy that wouldn't otherwise be used. So when facilities are often created, they can produce more energy than they need to produce. When someone is now buying that energy, it lowers the cost for everybody. They're meeting their needs, they're paying for the facility, they're paying their salaries, the energy production company, and now what they can do is lower prices. In the case of Gridless, it also gives them the opportunity to say, oh, okay, wow, this facility has now paid for itself. Now I can build another facility further out in rural Africa and start providing power to another village. I just wanted to put that in there for people, just that idea of Bitcoin subsidizing it, not necessarily being coming in saying we're going to buy all this energy and all your bills are going up. The relationship tends to be the inverse. We will buy the extra energy you have. We see this a lot in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, no? With the ERCOT system, Bitcoin miners selling energy back to the grid, helping to stabilize the grid. I don't know how familiar you are with that, or if you might be able to give us a little bit of an overview.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, I think there was a town in, was it Finland recent? No, it was Norway
Mm,
recently, where they kicked out the Bitcoin miners and the
yep,
price of power went up
yep,
in response. And, people are like,
yep,
what?
yeah,
Yes. Uh, people think of, people think of energy as um, fungible. They
yep,
think of electricity as fungible and portable, and it's not.
yep,
Uh, 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 the chief problem facing our grids right now is transmission and distribution. It's
yep,
getting power to people at the right time in the right place. It's not that we don't have enough energy. We don't have enough energy at the right time and place that we need it. Uh, Bitcoin mining acts as a kind of buffer. It takes excess energy from the times we have too much where it isn't needed, and it pays for it, and that allows us to charge less to the users, to the rest of the users who
yes,
use the same amount of power they were always using. I mean, one way to think about it is this: the whole grid is built around peaks. It's built around the peak consumption during the day and the peak consumption during the year, um, and also the valleys of production. Like because things go down, power plants go offline, they need maintenance. And so the danger points for grids is always like where you're in a valley of production and you're
yep,
at a peak of demand. That's where you have kind of a crisis. And everything structurally has to be built for that. All is fixed cost. And Bitcoin is a load, a buyer of electricity, a user of electricity, which does not add to peaks.
yep,
It'll never buy power at that peak price, but it fills in valleys of demand instead.
yep,
And it can just turn off if the grid needs power. So if you're whatever, you have a power plant that goes offline, uh, power becomes more expensive on the grid, Bitcoin miners turn off. Or you have a hot summer week or a cold snap in the winter, Bitcoin miners turn off. Uh, yeah, that people haven't appreciated that yet. When they do, I shouldn't say that. Some people have begun to appreciate it
yep,
around the world. Uh, uh, that Bitcoin doesn't add to peak. It's a load that doesn't add to peak. But most people are unaware. They just think of electricity as like something we need to conserve. It's not. It's something we need to conserve at the times and places it is scarce.
yep,
It is already in abundance at other times and places, and there we need to monetize it to reduce the unit cost of electricity across the system.
yep. Appreciate that. Super, super helpful. I didn't always grasp that at first. So people like yourself are the first people that sort of put this idea on my radar. But when I fully did grasp it, I was sort of like, I don't get how the whole world doesn't see this. But again, it takes
I mean,
time for people to
I mean,
recognize these
so
things.
there's a BBC piece recently where they did
Yeah.
interview Janet, among others, on
Yep.
gridless operations, and they noted in that piece that gridless plans on moving on when these microgrids get enough demand locally that they don't have excess. So you build out a
Mm,
hydro facility, then the local community, like, they don't have, since they haven't been electrified, they don't all have appliances and EVs and
yeah,
heat pumps
right.
and everything. So they don't actually have the local demand for the. Anytime you introduce someone to electricity,
Yeah.
there's a lag between when you build the infrastructure and when you get a steady demand of electricity that matches that output. And it's in that period where Bitcoin is especially helpful as a buyer.
Yep.
And once you have a lot of demand in an area for electricity, Bitcoin, it doesn't need to be there anymore. Um, it goes to some other location, and gridless is happy with that, right?
Yep.
Because it doesn't really. This is why you don't have Bitcoin mining in New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from that one hot tub
There's
place, but
there's two of them. Yeah. One
the
in
spa,
Brooklyn, one in
yeah.
Manhattan. Yeah.
apart from the spas, like, it doesn't make sense to, because the power is expensive there. There are other buyers.
Yep.
It does make sense to buy it in the remote jungles of Peru.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Another thing that I think a lot about is time frame here. So when I read your article, I was sort of like, does Troy have a time frame in mind of
Yeah.
like how quickly we need to
Yes.
distribute this? So let's say we are above 51% in the United States. That could lead to censorship of blocks and all this. Um, Ideally, how quickly does the hash rate now disperse? Where does it disperse to in your mind? What are some of the next regions where you think more of it could be absorbed or more miners could come online? What does the distribution of the hash rate look like in your mind?
Well, that's a great question. I don't have an exact timeline, and I don't also know exactly where the cheapest power is in the world. Um, but uh, I think it's going to happen fast.
Okay.
Honestly, it's going to surprise people how fast it happens, um, because um, because the hash rate increases are relentless and
Yeah.
brutal, and also because AI is making such tremendous inroads among the miners. I mean, among the leading pubcos, I mean, only CleanSpark is still making the pure play Bitcoin miners. The
Just
rest of
Bitcoin,
them,
right? Yeah.
are all like, oh, we're an energy and digital infrastructure company now,
Yep.
and we do compute, HPC, and uh, I mean, Margot Paez, my partner, research partner at BPI, we did a report on this a year ago, and we predicted this. We were talking to some miners who were like, no, we're not interested in AI, and we're just like looking at the numbers. AI is the opposite kind of consumer from
Yes.
Bitcoin. it
Yep.
it demands, at this point anyway, constant uptime, redundancy. uh, it's willing to pay a ton for power at this point anyway. uh, it just doesn't resemble the profile of Bitcoin at all. It can't be overseas for securities reasons. For a lot of data, must
Yep.
be in the United States. It must be close to urban areas, because of the latency of the signal for certain kinds of AI compute. Where
Uh,
you have queries, you want that query to be fast. Uh,
right.
so you want it to be at the edge of the network. So you can't have high latency. You can't be outside the United States. The cost of power doesn't really matter. You need redundancy. So completely different profile as a consumer, willing to pay a ton, many multiples
Right.
per watt. So Margot and I were like, when we realized this and sort of crunched the numbers 8 different ways, we were like, wow, Bitcoin mining in the United States is going to transform, because they have power. Power is scarce,
Yep.
and any site in the US that's suitable, even if it has to be rebuilt because of the unique, cooling requirements, and the requirements for running ASICs is different from running graphics cards. Even if that stuff has to be rebuilt, the access to power, given the growth of AI, uh, is worth a ton, and it's worth more
Hmm.
than mining Bitcoin. So AI is driving from the one side. this relentless hash rate rise is driving from the other side, pushing a hash price down. And those two forces are squeezing Bitcoin mining out of the US. Uh,
Interesting. Wow.
and I mean, I also think this heating movement. I went to the Heat Punk Summit
Yeah,
a
yeah.
month ago in Denver.
Denver? Yeah.
Like, I don't know how long that takes to launch, but I actually believe that heating with Bitcoin can scale. We
Yep.
have a so much resistance heating, electric resistance heating that is just running current through a wire and creating heat. And that's what ASICs do. They run current through a wire and create heat. That's where the energy all goes.
Yep.
Uh, that's smart heating. What we have now is dumb heating. I think it'll be inside the US and other places in the world, but it won't be necessarily subject to the treasury.
Yes.
Your water heater is not going to respond to um, it's not going to respond to an OFAC directive, or it
Yeah,
doesn't need
yeah.
to anyway, right?
Totally.
So
I was gonna
I
say
think,
I have my heat bit inside. Just for people who don't know, we have heat bit devices already, which are just home heaters. They don't make any
yeah,
noise. They're home. If you're, and they cost the exact same amount it would cost to plug in a Dyson, say a comparable device. So I mean, for those who are unfamiliar with this movement, I would say it's already underway. Not that heat bit is a U.S. centric thing, but I would say a lot of adoption for something like heat bit
yeah,
right now is happening in probably Western Europe and the United States, places like that. They're not
yeah.
cheap. So yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry
so
to interrupt you though.
no, I think there are multiple forces. AI as a competing bidder for power. They just have a lot more money. Uh, and then the hash rate is pushing Bitcoin into the dung beetle role. And the question is, like, how much super cheap power do we have in America that's stranded? That's really the question of how much hash rate will be here. And
Yep.
then I also think this movement to scale down to the level of heat will take off, and it's hard to compete um, it's hard to compete with the small scale miner who is running fluid through um, their driveway, and doing radiant floor heating, and has heating their hot water system. Like,
Yep.
if it's going to take some time for those systems to become integrated into HVAC proper systems where the
Yeah.
trades people know how to engage with them. uh, but I kind of see it happening. Uh, I don't know what the timeline for that is. You'd be better off asking one of the people in that business who are doing it.
Yeah.
There's a number of businesses that are doing, but they're all small scale. I think once that takes off, it's going to be hard for large miners to compete. Another one is these little operations in the oil field. We get flare gas,
Flare
uh,
gas, right?
uh, operations that flare gas is as a byproduct of oil drilling, which is vented or flared into the atmosphere because it's far from a pipeline. Those operations, uh, uh, Adam O has convinced me, are very cheap and have a
Okay.
lot of room to scale. So there would be a lot of that in the US, but it'll be like somebody out in with a hash hut with a small block V8. They're not going to be responsive to OFAC in the same way that the CEO of Riot is going to have to be.
Yep.
Uh, so I think it's like the dung beetle's time. The dung beetle rises,
Love it. I
and
love it.
over the next 5 years or so, I'm going to predict a pivot from the large pubcos to uh, some overseas mining, more AI, and and they're turning into stackers, right? They're just starting to stack Bitcoin. Like,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah, yeah.
marathon strategy. They're doing
Yep.
the micro strategy um, playbook because they have a lot of capital. And what does that tell you when Marathon decides to buy Bitcoin rather than mine it? It's the
Right. Yeah.
fundamental calculation every miner makes. It tells me, like, we're kind of approaching a ceiling of American mega data center hash rate growth
Yep.
because they find it more profitable just to buy Bitcoin.
Yep. 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 Interesting. Super fascinating. Troy, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but we do have to land the plane here. Just kind of curious if there's anything from the article or anything in general on this topic that we haven't touched on that maybe you want to touch on
Yeah.
real quick.
One more thing, and it
Hmm.
is really important, and I'm also least sure about it, but it's kind of nation state game theory.
Cool.
Um, uh, I think Bitcoin is a very unique nation state game. If nation states start mining Bitcoin in earnest, it's going to disrupt the built-in game theoretic principles of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
they could mine at a loss, and if they're mining at a loss, kind of like everybody's mining at a loss, and then Satoshi's vision once again is kind of thwarted. So it's another scenario I worry about. Like if I were the US and I wanted to attack Bitcoin, I would just mine Bitcoin at a loss and put
yep,
everybody else into trouble,
yep.
right? Um, and I've thought a lot about this, and I think that the game theory is actually misunderstood, especially by Jason Lowery and his followers. Uh,
Software, the author of Software, for
the
those
author of
listening. Yeah.
Software, yeah, I think there's a misimpression, even that Michael Saylor also kind of plays into, that Bitcoin is like other sorts of defense systems. It's
Mm,
critical infrastructure, and we need a neutral critical infrastructure that's secure. And I mean, I agree with all of that. I think it's crucially different from any weapon system or
okay.
even technology taken that's ever taken place before. In that, uh, it's not subject to what's known as the Thucydides trap in foreign
Yep.
policy. Um, the Thucydides trap comes from the Peloponnesian Wars, where Sparta was a rising power, Athens was an existing power, and Athens had to attack Sparta before Sparta built up to be as big as Athens or bigger, right? So it's like a, if you have an advantage, you need to take it while you still have it and establish total dominance. And you can think about this for not just military might, but something like uh, advantages in uh, say internet technology
Yep.
or any other kind of technology. You want to be dominant in the world
Yep.
in that technology, and then lean into your dominance. It's always good to be dominant. uh, with Bitcoin, it's not. If you're dominant, uh, Bitcoin loses. So if you have 51% of the hash rate, as I think we do right now, then other nations, like let's say Russia, have less incentive to store their wealth in Bitcoin,
Yes.
because we could do the same thing to their wealth that we actually did during the invasion of Ukraine, where we
Yep.
seized their reserves, right?
Hmm.
Bitcoin is no longer a haven from that if one nation controls 51% of it. So there's actually, you do not want to have more than 50% of hash rate. Um, you want to have enough hash rate that nobody else has more than 51%.
Right.
And
Right.
in a multipolar world with hash rate distributed around the world, that number is not 51%. That number could be very low. Like Russia doesn't have to worry if China has sufficient hash rate, Iran has sufficient hash rate, Nigeria has sufficient hash rate, right?
Right.
And there's enough of it in little villages here and there through grid lists. There's
Right.
enough of it um, in hash huts out in the middle of the oil field. Russia doesn't need to have 50% to prevent the US from having 50%.
Yeah.
They just need enough that they can be sure to get transactions in and that nobody will block them. So this is I try to spell this out in the piece, a unique, totally unique game theoretic situation where, for once, unlike nuclear weapons or uh, any other technology, you don't want to be the winner. You want to not be a loser.
That's a
And
perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
everybody is in that same situation. And
Yep.
if we begin to understand that as a world, if the globe begins to understand that, then nobody will say the kinds of things that, Trump was saying on the campaign trail, like make all the Bitcoin here, because then nobody's going to want to opt in that system. But also, it's kind of a hopeful vision for human cooperation and competition.
Yep.
You're not trying to dominate other people. This is a network that where as long as nobody wins, everybody wins. And if
There's.
someone wins, everybody loses. That's new. And people need to get their heads around that. And then they'll stop talking about, hash wars as if it's like other weapon systems. It's fundamentally new.
Yeah. Agreed. It creates almost more of a symbiotic situation than it does a pure competition situation. Super, super fascinating. Troy, thank you so much for your time in doing this. Thank you for everything you've contributed to this space over the years. It's truly amazing. And one more quick shill for this topic, Troy's article, plus a ton of other really, really important articles on Bitcoin mining and decentralizing the hash rate. Check out the new print edition of Bitcoin Magazine. Troy, where can people find you? Where should they follow you? Any final closing thought here?
I'm at the Tro Crow on Twitter. That's where I live, or X. Really nice talking to you today, Frank. Yeah, this was a fun piece to write, and there's a lot more to be said, but I appreciate the chance to share that vision.